Part of the reason that I wanted to do this panel is because I really value the way that so many brewers place a premium on their staff, their employees, their relationship to the environment and to the community, and this was a real opportunity for the San Diego craft beer community to communicate that message to a broad audience. To really provide anybody that's thinking about starting a brewery or expanding a brewery, or really in a wide range of businesses, to understand that they can find ways to value the contributions of their employees as they build out a profitable business. Most of the breweries that, the brewery owners that I know really have a sense of fairness and want to treat their employees well, and this panel was an opportunity, even though most of those employees work above the minimum wage and won't directly be impacted. It really gives us a chance to highlight the ways that you can build a business and to talk about sort of employee satisfaction and growth in the context of a brewery startup. This conversation will be useful regardless of where a brewery happens to be.
So what we're going to do is sort of start this off by giving each of our panelists an opportunity to just help you understand their position in the beer world, why they got started, what the basics are of their brewery, and what their philosophy is when it comes to things like their team and paying for wages and really thinking about the process of having a brewery. And why don't we start on this end this time with Mr. Haas.
We opened last year in September, and we've been in town for a little while. Marty and I, my co-founder, we came from Rock Bottom Brewery in La Jolla, where Marty was brewmaster there 17 years, and I was there over 10 years. So been in town a while. And also one reason I mentioned it is just because we come from, Rock Bottom is a brew pub, which is a restaurant with a brewery attached. So in terms of some things we're talking about today, there's definitely a lot of things that Marty and I were familiar with already moving into opening Second Chance. And the labor component is definitely one of those things.
You said when you open, how big is the brewery?
So our brewery, well, square footage wise, it's 12,000 square feet. We have a 30-barrel brew house. We currently have, after 9 months, we are still, I think we're about to hire our 10th employee will be our next employee, so we still have 10 or less employees.
So Modern Times is about to celebrate its third anniversary in July. Thanks, Doug. Thanks, guys. I came from Stone Brewing Company, that's where I learned the business. I've been a home brewer for many years before that, but Stone being a brewer, a retailer, and a distributor, that was really where I got my education in how to run a brewery. And I really could not have asked for a better, more informative entry into this business. So when I left Stone, walked away from my paycheck and my health care and all that good stuff, and took the absolutely terrifying leap into starting a business, I already had a really good idea of what I wanted Modern Times to look like. I'd spent the last 3 years writing the business plan, creating the vision for what it would be, and then set about implementing it at a furious pace. So coming up on 3 years, we now have 85 employees. We'll brew somewhere close to 40,000 barrels this year, and we do have 2 tasting rooms now, one at the brewery, another satellite. We're currently in the process of building a brew pub, so restaurant, brewery, and cafe in Los Angeles in downtown. We're hoping to open that sometime this year. And there's always a ton of other projects in the works. So constantly growing both the production side and the retail customer-facing side of the business.
I should have done what somebody else did and done a little understudy at another brewery before going on. Good idea, Jacob, learning how to run the business before you actually how to run the business. Yeah, right. That's very accurate. And so I've run the Lightning Brewery for about 10 years now. We just passed our 10th year anniversary of selling our first keg, although we haven't. I've yet to make a buck off the brewery, I have to say. However, there's, it's always a waxing, waning kind of program, and hopefully you have to be ultimately optimistic in a business sense. We have a 30-barrel brew house. We have the only step and decoction capable brew house in Southern California. we naturally carbonate all our beers. Our kind of overall philosophy is essentially a marriage between the art and science of beer, where we might have artistic goals, but we get them kind of by a fairly rote scientific method where you change one thing and then make sure the beer gets better, and then change one other thing and make the beer better, versus change 10 things at once and cross your fingers and maybe you can repeat it. For the overall philosophy with dealing with employees, we have about 6, and we've had about 6 for about 6 years now. We've trained a lot of people in the beer trade at Lightning, I got to tell you that much. And a lot of people have kind of cycled through Lightning. A few people have started their own brewery now. I think probably it's because, well, if Jim can do it, anybody can do it, because I'm so not that great at doing it. They kind of think they can. But in that sense, we do make beers that people don't make, and so we've focused on several really successful lager beers, beers that are fermented cooler, and then have kind of a smoother flavor, maltier flavor to them. And then we focused on a couple of German-style ales. So, for instance, Thunder Weissen Ale is a really great selling, greatly appreciated Hefeweizen beer in Southern California. And that's kind of where we're coming from. That's where we are and where we're going.
All right, so Society Brewing Company, we just celebrated 4 years.
Woo! Yay!
Yeah. It's old people right now. But so I started the brewery with my business partner, Travis Smith. We were both brewers at a couple other places, and decided that we wanted to do our own thing. So went out, raised some money, and I guess we stay pretty small. We self-distribute. We focus on beers that we like to drink, and being small allows us to do that. So it's, I don't know, I just like our beer. It's a lot of hoppy stuff, a couple Belgians, some stouts, and I don't know what else to say.
And so what does it mean to be small?
What does it mean to be small? We're not focused on growth. I don't think year-over-year growth percentage-wise is a way to rate how good your beer is. That doesn't mean that you can't be big and have fantastic beer. I look at Firestone, Sierra Nevada. As they get bigger, they get better.
We have a voluntary $15 an hour minimum wage at Modern Times. We've had that for a while. That's something that, I mean, it went up very slightly. We started at $14 an hour, and then we now have an internal minimum wage of $15. That's part of what I love about this industry is it's a big tent, right? And under that big tent, many different models can fit.
I look at brewing like a choreographed dance. 8 hours long with no repetitive steps. That is much, much harder to do than running a kegging line. So I see where it comes from, but as people go up, they're going to get paid more for the skills they've learned, the ability that they've had to carry out that task. So
I have seen cellarmen make anywhere from $10 an hour to $16, $17, $18 an hour, and I don't know enough about the business to understand what those differences are, why that range exists. Any of you want to first tell everybody in the viewing audience what a cellarman is, and then explain that sort of difference? Doug looks like he's ready to go.
We like to think that we pay the guys well that do production work even part-time. And some of our bartenders, we pay them, they'll clock out from their bar shift, and they will do production work, whether it's kegging, washing kegs, and they'll clock back in for their wages for bartending.
The thing is that we've always had a cellarman, and person gets paid the same as everybody else. I don't think like being a cellarman is like a low job. I mean, I was washing kegs today, and teaching someone else how to wash kegs today.
Without diving in, without actually starting the conversation, I'd say, minimum wage as it relates to folks who are deriving most of their income from tips is the most controversial aspect of this whole thing. That's the part that anytime I talk to folks, especially obviously in the service industry, that becomes the sticking point.
Well, it's an interesting point, right? Because, for better or worse, our policymakers, they come from a variety of backgrounds, but they're often not business people. The four of you are. Many of you in the audience either are business people or will be soon enough. Do you get the sense with your employee staff that you've all, for the other three of you, have done a similar sort of calculation to say, look, this job requires this set of skills, and there's not that many people that do it, and so I'm going to pay them a little bit more.
I always expect more from people that work with me, and I pay them a little more. I probably don't pay them enough more in terms of what I expect, but I pay a little more, and then they're responsible for actually delivering.
Sure, it's an interesting point. Laszlo Bock, the chief people officer at Google, actually wrote a book called Work Rules about that very point, that your best employees oftentimes are not worth 2 or 3 or a few dollars more than your sort of middle level. They're actually potentially worth 2 or 3 times as many, right? And because of the level of involvement, the people that'll stay there. I mean, I know some of you that I've seen at work because I go in your breweries a lot, and you're there all the time.
One of the things that is happening as the industry matures and grows, and there starts to be actual competitive pressure, which is not something any of us have really experienced before, is that there is more demand for qualified labor than there is supply. And that's starting to put upward pressure on wages, which I think, even though I'm the one cutting the checks, is a good thing.
I guess equally important, as to that last cost of living piece, like, what do you think about it?
For us, in terms of attracting and retaining candidates, is something people really value. And I think people really value the dignity of being treated like an adult. Just saying, like, look, the results are in place. As long as you produce results, your brother's in town and you want to take the afternoon off, go home, whatever, like, that's fine. I don't need to hold your hand through that.
We give all of our employees a credit card with $100 on it per month to spend on beer that's not society's. So we want you guys to go out, or them, because no one's here, but we want them to go out and buy Lightning, buy Modern Times, buy Second Chance, and drink beer, and not worry about dropping $10 on a bottle that they might not think they can afford or something like that. So that's part of it.
For the breweries in LA or New Jersey or Texas or what have you, quite frankly, for the other industries in San Diego, right? How is it that you've been able to say this is a value and we're gonna stand by this and make it work within our model? Did you have to cut some corner that, like, you haven't mentioned? Did you have to grow slower? What?
No, it's, as Jacob tells me all the time, we're really bad at making money. We try to write one, and it never finished before the time we raise money. So it was a skeleton.
So one thing that I think is really different about craft brewing versus other startups, this being Startup Week, brewing, as Jim just explained, is an incredibly capital-intensive business. And in many ways, it's a throwback. It's an old-school bricks-and-mortar manufacturing industry. And that is really not what the rest of the startup world looks like for the most part. I see some of the staffing numbers at software companies and versus their revenue, and it's just like you could never ever accomplish something like that in brewing. When you write a piece of software, it is infinitely reproducible. When you make beer, there is a human being at every point in the process, and those human beings are working with equipment that is insanely expensive. So I think, when I've talked to other people who have started businesses and things like that, they are often like agog at the amount of money you have to raise to start a brewery, and then also just the ongoing capital needs are insane.
That sort of capital conversation, the money involved, is an important one when you think about, well, how much is this, how much should I get as an employee, how much should I get as an owner? The understanding that capital question is a useful piece. So I'd like to turn to our first question. You can feel free to adjust it to any of the panel members.
The four of you guys are rock stars in terms of taking care of your people. I love that. I'm about 4 months out, I hope, from opening.
Nice.
So, and most of them up there know me or know of me.
Yeah.
The main question that I have is actually healthcare and how you manage healthcare in terms of offering that to your employees.
We cover 75% for our employees and their dependents for health, dental, and then we do 100% for life insurance.
Yeah, well before we were required by law to offer healthcare, we began offering healthcare as soon as we could realistically afford it, and which was within a couple months of opening, essentially.
Do you offer equity to anybody other than people who have invested financially in your company? And second part, what do you see as the drivers of that choice?
So we've always offered equity as an option, not as a compensation option, but for employees that have been with the brewery for more than a year. And what I've found is that there's a lot of churning in the beer trade, and folks are not willing to commit. And so we get in that discussion after a year.
All Modern Times employees are eligible for equity distribution after 5 years.
Again, we're the newest on the panel, but we are currently, and since the beginning, I've always wanted to forge ahead and have a structure that is similar to like New Belgium, where it is ends up being employee owned one day. That's absolutely a goal of ours. We're just currently trying to figure out the structure.
A lot of pro-labor rhetoric, which I really appreciate. But I was curious, I'm maybe a little concerned there's not enough variety of opinion similar to that. But what would you guys think about transparency in what you pay? Like if it became public what you guys paid, would you be for it, against it? I don't know, anything that you have to offer on the idea.
Right, a couple of private companies came out and said, we're going to take away the stigma and actually encourage employees to talk about how much they're making. We're not going to make it a sort of a faux pas, or, you know, and most of us have had one job or another in our lives where it was not okay to talk about how much you're making. And so I think that Tom's point is an interesting one for the panelists, and I'd be interested actually, Tom, if you're willing after they answer, since you are at a brewery, what your sense is. Are you comfortable with the notion of people having, of the industry having that understanding, or is it one of those things that you're like, well, that's a little dicey?
Yeah, at Modern Times, there's no particular, push one way or the other to be open about your pay, nor is there any like, oh my God, it's so super secret. I mean, I think places that are really hardcore about trying to keep salaries private are probably interested more in what that means for their ability to underpay people than they are in anything else. I don't think it's a big deal one way or the other. I think some resources that are truly extremely valuable are some of the industry surveys that show average salaries across different sizes and scales and regions of breweries. So when we look at, are we paying our people a fair scale, those being able to have that transparency across the industry is extremely valuable.
Do you have any thoughts about retirement, or how you handle retirement, how you plan for retirement when you're building your brewery, and whether you think that's something that, to Jacob's point, it's a moral imperative or it's a business sort of sense decision? How do you handle that in the context of people who are doing very hard jobs for a very long time?
Yeah, so it's definitely not something I gave any thought to at the very beginning. It was only once we started adding more and more staff and that group became more and more diverse that it really quickly became obvious to me that it was something we had to address. So, we've rapidly implemented a 401k plan, but it's also totally obvious to me that is not enough, right? And the large majority of the people who work at Modern Times, the large majority of people in the industry tend to be younger, and so those are often folks that are not contributing to their own 401k plan. They're not thinking about retirement, so there needs to be some other piece to that. That's something we've given a lot of thought to and are looking into a bunch of different options. And I think there's again a lot of ways to address that, but I do think it is absolutely something that breweries have a responsibility to address in one form or another.
Along the same things that Jacob said, that it's not everybody's into it. I don't want to throw the word socialism out, but I just did. And
says the investment banker. Nice.
you don't appreciate it until you need to use it. And I think it depends on the department at society. If you're bartending versus production versus sales versus office, who wants it more? And we've noticed from different sides that some people don't care about the health care. They don't care about a retirement plan. They just want the cash. And it's kind of hard to balance that out. Planning wise, I say plan for it. Plan for it, budget for it. You need to at least make the effort to take care of your employees.
These are topics that we have been talking about since the beginning, but being fairly early, we're still trying to mold how that will work. And they're right. I mean, the majority of who's in our industry are young or youngish people that tend to not necessarily focus on it, although it doesn't mean you shouldn't offer it, but like Doug said, it's a balance between offering it. Are they going to take it? No. Well, at least you've offered it, and how that structure is going to go. So I mean, these are all things that being a people-driven company that we are also focused on from day one, but still kind of tailoring how that's going to be shaped as we go.
I'm curious what % of your bottom line staffing and all the various compensation that comes into that represents towards your costs, and the degree to which you review and look over wages and adjust them on a regular basis. Is it a structured way in which you look at wages and make adjustments on some time scale, or is it on an individual basis?
We target payroll as 20% of revenue. That's kind of a standard. It's not like something we invented. That's kind of the norm across the board. Again, it's a target. We do what we think is right and fair and best for the company, kind of even if that means we go over that 20% target. But yeah, as far as a formal review, I mean, that's a once a year annual review process, but we review compensation basically on an as needed basis. So if someone steps up in a massive way, if their job responsibilities grow, whatever it is, when it's time, when someone really deserves more. And yeah, I mean, I think that's just, it's also part of being in a fast growth environment. Things change so rapidly that something someone was hired to do 3 months ago might look really different right now. So I think if you're being realistic about trying to keep your people and trying to compensate them appropriately, it's something you think about every day and change as needed.
How you handle managing the talent in your across your corporation.
Management was and remains a real challenge for me. This is running Modern Times is the first time I've ever managed anybody. I've never been someone's boss before. That was super weird. So yeah, I mean, it's definitely something, but that I think about a lot. But it's really just an extension of the kind of humane philosophy I apply to the nuts and bolts stuff, the wages, the health care, the time off, all that kind of thing. I think that people get it. Like when the philosophy is results oriented and you pay that way and you have policies that reinforce that, that message is communicated really clearly. So, in general, we operate on this kind of sliding scale, right? Like if the results are outstanding, you're probably not ever going to talk to me. If the results aren't outstanding, I'm going to get really interested in how you're doing your job.
What you're getting to is this idea of transparency in terms of management. And there's a series of expectations, and then there's a series of things where people can grow into their jobs. So, the thing is that you act, by and large, you don't actually know what people can do best, but in order for the business to work, they have to do a certain type of thing. If they do a great job at that, that's great. And then if there's something else they can do, they should communicate that back.
Of course, I try to go out of my way to praise, jobs well done, certainly. However, that said, we really try to hire people that are deeply, deeply passionate about their work, because those people are largely self-motivated, and they look at those outstanding results as kind of a reward unto itself. So, certainly we try to get our managers to acknowledge excellent work and then reward it with either compensation or whatever makes sense in that context. But for the most part, that it kind of starts at the top. People know that I am like insanely overinvested in the outcome of everything we do, and they tend to mirror that.
Can you start, and we'll just say one piece of advice to somebody thinking about starting, and any parting word?
For people starting out, one thing I've heard a couple different times, in terms of building out, you talked earlier, and we didn't really touch on about trying to project costs. I think one thing for startups, when you're trying to do the labor piece, one thing people tend to forget about is payroll tax.
Great point.
You got to add, no less than 30% on top of your labor cost, whatever dollar amount you're paying somebody. That's a huge piece that some people tend to get blindsided by. That's it just for the numbers. But I mean, just overall, I think if you're thinking about it, whether it's this industry or any industry, you have to have the passion for it, because whatever industry it is, it's going to be a ton of work. We have a lot of fun with what we do because it's beer, and who wouldn't want to work in that industry? And we love it, but at the end of the day, it is as much work, if not more, than working for someone else in any industry. So you have to love it first and foremost. And if you don't, you should figure out what that thing is that you love and do that, because it's not any easier because it's beer. It's fun, you get to drink, but it's still a ton of work.
Yeah, people definitely think that owning a brewery is like a Willy Wonka type situation, and yeah, it's not. So yeah, I mean, as it relates to labor, I think the piece of advice I would give to someone looking to start a brewery is that attracting the best people from the very beginning absolutely has to be part of the way you're thinking about building and marketing your brand, right? Like when you are starting this thing that is embodiment of the passion you have and you're presenting it to the world, keep in mind that as a startup, people are not going to generally be beating down your door to work for you, right? You're going to have to sell them on the idea of working for you, because, put yourself in their position. Why are they going to leave the job that they like with a salary they can depend on for a company that doesn't actually exist yet, and take this massive risk to come along on this crazy dream that you have? So that was really something that I guess caught me by surprise in a lot of ways, probably because I never really thought about it. But yeah, I mean, just in terms of like, all right, now I'm going to have to figure out how to really attract people to me. They're not just going to come rushing to, eagerly join my startup. And then just as a general piece of advice, I would say if you're not like absolutely 100% insanely dedicated to making the best beer possible, please find something else to do.
Yeah, definitely on the beer case. Thanks, Jacob. So what I would say is the best piece of information for anyone who's interested in starting a brewery is, if you think it's going to cost a certain amount of cash, multiply it by 3, and then be sure that you can get about threefold more than that. So if you have a number, and I'm not going to say what the number is, make sure you have access to about 10-fold more cash than what you actually think you have access to. And if you can do that, you'll probably make the business work. And if you can't do that, it's going to be really iffy. So we've been in business for 10 years. Obviously, Jacob's done a little better than us in terms of size and employees and making money and stuff. But if I would have known that little rule I just told you, I would have been in a different position right now. It goes without saying that you should actually really appreciate your employees and your colleagues. And I actually don't treat our employees as employees. I treat them as colleagues.
It should go without saying.
People that I work with, people that I appreciate. And sometimes you have to be heavy-handed, and sometimes you don't have to be heavy-handed.
You get into because there's nothing else in the world you want to do. And if you have that kind of mindset, I think everything's going to be fine. I mean, none of us got into this for the money, for anything else other than being happy. And even starting a brewery, there are gripes every single day. So if you don't love it more than anything else in the whole entire world, it's gonna suck a lot, big time. But that being said, it's the greatest industry in the world to be in.
That's fantastic. And so with that, thank you for coming out. I hope that those of you who work in the industry got a sense of the possibilities, got a sense of what the issues are that exist based on the size of the brewery as we turn to the what next and the growth of the San Diego beer market. It's it's heartening to see that we have brewers and brewery operators like the panel here who really do think about questions of how is my team going to perform, and not just from a how much money am I going to make, but most importantly from the standpoint of I love this industry, I love this beer, and I really want to make sure that we're taking care of people as humans. So with that, thank you all for coming.
I think breweries really need to, especially new breweries or those that are starting up, really need to think about how important it is to invest in their staff, particularly with education, so that then they have somebody in-house who can train new staff. In the end, they end up spending less resources because they have somebody in-house, and that it also, continuing education as well, to keep investing and continuing to further their education so that the trainings will grow within their institution, and then overall they become more competitive in the industry because people will want to come there because their staff is knowledgeable, the service is impeccable, their draft systems are clean. Everything that we teach here at San Diego State in our program, people in-house will know that, and that will just help that company grow. So I think what we've seen in the industry too is the value of the education we provide here at San Diego State Extended Studies is really a high value to employers, because what we're doing is we're helping to provide that service, that education and that training for them. And I think breweries can really take advantage of that and start looking to the universities, to programs like us as a partner, as an educational partner for their employees, which is great. It's so nice we can go on site at breweries, and when they can also send their employees, here in group, and they know that they're going to get a high quality education.